Burning Man is a microcosm of what the world could be. And I think the intent that what I've experienced is that a lot of people go to Burning Man and it changes them. Like it's a profound, deeply profound experience if if they open themselves up to that, and they start to realize that we can, we can live differently, that there is a different way, and that there's this shared humanity that we all have. And I like the amount of people that I just struck up conversations with, random strangers, and had incredible conversations. Just, it's magnificent. And people just giving you hugs in the middle of the desert, that it just gives me hope that we might find our way, so that we can live differently than we are.
My name is Simon Waller, and this is the Future with Friends podcast, a show where I make zero attempt to try and predict the future, even though I'm a trained futurist, and instead I enlist my friends to do it for me. Thankfully, I have some very smart and insightful friends. Some of them are best-selling authors. Most will be considered leading thinkers in their field of expertise. I guarantee that every single one of them will have compelling and unique insights to share about what might happen next. Each episode, I invite a friend onto the show to explore the future of anything that they would like. I then task them to go away and create a short scenario about that future set at least 5 years from now, something that captures their hopes and dreams, or maybe their fears and concerns. And then over the course of the show, we dissect that scenario. We start to think about the critical uncertainties, the alternate possibilities, and the decisions that we can make today to create the future that we want tomorrow. Welcome to The Future with Friends. Hello and welcome to episode 14 of The Future with Friends. Today I'm being joined by a wonderful human being, a friend of mine by the name of Michael Schiffner. Now, Mike and I have known each other since around 2010, when we were both working out of a co-working space in Melbourne called The Hub. In fact, Mike was probably one of the first handful of people I met when I moved here from Perth. A few weeks ago, I asked Mike to come on the podcast and suggested he could talk about the future of absolutely anything he would like. And the subject that he has chosen is the future of deep connection. It is something that Mike has spent a lot of time thinking about, both through his own work, but also through his involvement in men's circles and men's workshops. And also, as you'll hear in this podcast, about his experiences visiting Burning Man in the US in his mid-30s. In fact, this scenario he shares is one of his son, Blake, having a parallel experience in the future to the one that he had in the past. It's a beautifully written scenario, one of the most amazing ones that I've seen in its ability to balance both this dystopian and utopian views about what might unfold for human society. It's done in such a artful way, where we kind of see people turning up into this space from all walks of life, but then having this shared deep experience together. In our conversation, we unpack, what these experiences were like for Mike, but also what his hopes and dreams are for human society, but also what are the very small and practical steps that we could all take to take us to a world of deeper connection with the people around us. Wonderful conversation. I think you're going to love it. Welcome to The Future with Friends. Hello and welcome to episode 14 of The Future with Friends. Today I'm being joined by one of my oldest friends in Melbourne. And that's an amazing guy by the name of Michael Schiffner. Though I think we've pretty much moved on to Mike now. So I'm just going to use Mike. Weirdly though, just as a bit of an aside before we kind of jump into everything this podcast has to offer, what are you like with nicknames? Because I'm this thing as well where I introduce myself to people as Simon, but all of my kind of close friends call me Si, right? But it's almost like I don't necessarily give that away to people. And it's almost like you have to discover it by yourself. And for a long time, you always all your emails are signed as Michael. And yet you kind of get called Mike. What's that? What's that all about?
Yeah, it's actually funny that you ask because, my birth name was Michael, and as a young boy, I never went with Michael. In fact, all my friends from my childhood knew me as Mike because my mother would use Michael when she was angry or upset with me. So it had this negative connotation. So for years, people knew me by Mike. But then when I got into my 20s, I felt like I'd grown into Michael. And so I started going with that. But I would say, um, certainly since I moved to Australia 23 years ago, I've had a lot of people shorten my name, and Mick is the other one. I get Mick and Mike. The only one that I don't like is Mikey. There was a negative association to that word when I was growing up. There was a television commercial that made fun of this boy Mikey, and I just used to get teased when I was young. So I've got a negative association with Mikey, but Mike and Mick I'm fine with, and
Yeah, it's so
happy.
funny about the name associations that we make. I feel super sorry for anyone called Karen at the moment. And I know some
Oh,
really lovely Karens, but the fact that you have had your name associated with someone like something so negative, like it just feels like blatantly unfair is the first thing.
mm,
But let's
yeah.
go back. So I first met you as Michael, and at the time, I think it was around 2010. It was only just after I arrived in Melbourne from Perth, and we were both working out of probably one of Melbourne's very first co-working spaces, a place called Hub Melbourne. Do you remember much of like our interactions back then?
Well, what I do remember was, that was a really interesting period in my life because my son had just been born. He was just about a year old at that time, and so I was navigating, fatherhood and you know, uh, trying to find a place that I could work where I wouldn't get interrupted, and discovered the hub. And what I do remember was just uh, the impression that you made on me. I think you just had this energy and this vibe that I was like, oh, that's somebody I want to get to know better. And I'm just delighted that we're still friends and we've got to know each other, both professionally and personally.
Yeah, because I feel like at some point in the last 5 or 6 years, some fuel has been thrown on the friendship fire. In I did cheat a little bit. I looked back through some of our email threads, and there's been this kind of constant connection that's happened, but it's often been sporadic. It's like, hey, do you want to catch up for a beer after work? But that might not then happen again for another 6 to 8 or 12 months. And then I remember something, it must have been maybe 2019. I think we caught up at a co working space. It might have been that I ran an event there and it just happened that you were working out of it, a different co working space in the city. I remember us sitting down and we had this conversation for a couple of hours, maybe longer. And I've found out so many interesting parallels between our lives. And we talked about, sailing was a big thing that came out of it. I think you got arrested in Cuba on a yacht into Cuba. You sailed a yacht across the Atlantic. And I thought I'd done some pretty cool stuff like, trips to Indonesia and a Cedar Hobart yacht race. But there was some really, like, I was like, oh, the richness and the complexity of our friendship elevated dramatically.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then since then, there's been a few other little things. I think the other thing that happened was we ran into each other at a dance event. It might have been, was it down at
Yeah, Carl Cox. Yeah, Carl
Carl
Cox
Cox and
event.
Rosebud? Yeah, and
Yeah.
I wasn't necessarily, it wasn't something we had arranged. I think we just
No.
turned up at the same place. And again, I do think that those type of events are ones whereby, I don't know, like it feels like because they sit just slightly on the fringe of society.
Hmm.
When you run into people there, it feels like there is a sense of connection that gets created, or that like a belongingness that exists in those communities. that you don't necessarily get in day-to-day life. And I think from there, I think over the last, I know, especially since kind of the pandemic years, these kind of our connections and our catches and stuff have become more common to the point whereby I think it was only the last time we saw each other in real life was only on Friday, where we sauntered and cold dipped together at Mordialloc. So it's been interesting, that journey, but I really loved to discover more things as we go on. And weirdly, this is a really wonderful segue into our conversation for today. Is that not right?
Yeah, I think it's a perfect segue.
So I mean, I had you on my list of potential podcast guests for a while, and then we talked maybe about 3 weeks ago, where I said, look, I'm going to kind of lock this thing in, and gave you the option to talk about the future of absolutely anything. And can you share a little bit? Because in that conversation, there was a few different ideas that got thrown around, but there was something that you shared around one of, I suppose, or some of your, I kind of describe as a frustration. Maybe it's a curiosity that you have since moving from Canada to Australia that kind of sits at the heart of this. Do you want to share a little bit about what that is for you?
Yeah, yeah, I think for me, one of the things that's paramount to life for me is connection and connectivity, and um I really feel that that the the best things in life are experiences, and experiences um shared with others. And so, for example, the Carl Cox concert where I just randomly bumped into you, we happened to be in the same place, and then we ended up, dancing the entire afternoon together, and sharing that experience created a connection and a bond and a deeper connection, between you and I. And we've since done that a couple times. And other experiences that have created more opportunities for connection. And one of my observations of having moved to, I moved to Australia 23 years ago, and I've been surprised and disappointed with many of the Australians that I have met that have been, reticent to make deeper connections. Like, they're very polite and friendly, but it's a kind of a surface level relationship. We didn't go deeper and get a chance to, go have experiences together like you and I have had, invite one another over for a meal. And I often contemplate on the impact on society that has when it's a cultural norm. My experience of other cultures. So, I grew up in Canada, and my experience of Canadian culture and American culture is there's a much deeper sense of hospitality. And I've also experienced that in Europe. And when I say hospitality, the concept of customer experience is a very different experience in those countries. And I think the tip culture obviously is part of that. So people who are working in a cafe or restaurant, will go the extra mile because they want to get a good tip from you. But I think that is pervasive in culture, and so what you see is people being incredibly generous and hospitable. So, for example, I was in Hawaii uh, for a wedding, for my last wedding, about 10 years ago, and we were just walking down the beach, and I saw a husband and wife just putting in a catamaran. So you can relate to this, Simon, because it was a sailing, and I saw another sailor getting onto a Hobie cat, and they're just so much fun. Have you used one before? Yeah.
I have, yeah, I do. I really enjoy it, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's such a scream, right? So this guy's just loading it into the water with his wife, and we're walking along, and his eyes caught mine, and I just acknowledged him, and I said, "Oh wow," I said, "I love Hobie cats. They're so much fun," and we struck up a conversation, and during that conversation, I said, "Is there anywhere around here that I can rent one?" And he said, "Oh, there used to be, but they're all gone now." And then he turned and looked up the beach, and there was another Hobie cat up on the land, and he pointed to that one, and he said, That's also mine as well. If you want, I'll rig it up and you can take it out with your wife." Complete stranger, right? Like, didn't know me, and just was willing to let me take his, take his catamaran. That's the kind of spirit of generosity that I have not always seen here in Australia. And I feel it's sad, because I think there's a lot of people missing out, and I think that deeper, that humanity, those random acts of kindness, are what add the richness to our lives.
So there's a couple of things in that conversation that I found a tiny bit confronting. This is just the conversation about what you're going to come and talk about. And that was one of them, because as an Australian, we have a story or a folklore about ourselves that, we're all about the battlers and we're all there to help each other. And mateship is a big thing, within our kind of our culture. And to hear that as someone who's come here, that wasn't your experience, I found that a little bit confronting. And on one hand, you try and explain it away. It's like, well, you can't just make rash generalizations like that. Obviously, we're not all the same, and we're not. But at the same time, you can't dismiss the person's your experience, because from my knowledge of you, you've always been very generous with your own invitations. Hey, come to this dance party, or come play poker at my place, or I'm going down to the hot springs. Like, you're very generous with those invitations. So I kind of think that's interesting, but I did find that I was like, oh, okay. The second thing that I found confronting, though, in this kind of the conversation about our conversation was, in this space around deep connection, you have done a lot of work in kind of like men's groups, and that type of a setting. And it's something that I have, shied away from, I'd say. And I think the idea, I have people who, very good friends and people that I actually trust, and rate very highly, who run a men's circle. But the very concept of it is something that I've gone, oh, that just I don't know how it feels to me. And yeah, weirdly, on the flip side of that, I also believe there's something missing in terms of that kind of men friendship space. And I crudely put it through the lens of, like, for our parents' generation, there was a pub. And as much as associating just friendships with alcohol is probably an unhealthy thing to do, at least there was a place to go where other men would be, that you could actually have some man time, and that it feels like is missing. And so I know that kind of this kind of these men's groups and this kind of deep man work stuff kind of makes theoretical sense to me. It's something I've always gone like, I don't know what it is about me that pushes back on that feeling. So this topic that you've chosen around deep connection and knowing that this is part of your experience and something that you rate so highly, intrigues me about what we're going to be talking about today. And so I am doing my best to kind of like, how do I get past those kind of feelings? Does that resonate with you at all?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, can I share a little story of deep connection, and just where that, where it can lead to?
Please do.
Probably, I'm thinking it's probably 5-6 years ago. I'm not sure, but I was a member of a tennis club, not far from here, maybe 15 minutes from my house, and I was playing regularly in a men's league. So once a week, we had show up and play. And this particular day, there was a guy there that I'd not seen before. And anyways, during one of the breaks when we were both not playing, I just introduced myself. We got chatting. I asked him where he was from, and he was explaining that he, he was currently residing in Thailand, um, but lived in the U.S. for many years, and his mom lives in Hampton, which is just around the corner from the tennis club, and he was visiting his mom for a few weeks. So, anyways, like I think many people would just leave it at that, but I said, well, seeing as you're here and you don't know too many people, if you want to have another hit or catch up for a coffee, let me know. And he went, oh, that'd be really great. And so that was the start of a wonderful friendship. And turns out, like he was a Hollywood producer, and was involved with producing The Matrix and amazing movies like that. And like the list went on, and I was like, wow, like so. And as a result, we've kept up contact, and every year when he comes back to visit his mom, we would catch up and we'd invite him over for dinner. And one year he said, well, why don't you come to Thailand? I know it really well. And he had went to Phuket at the start of the pandemic and got stuck there, and ended up having this amazing experience of being able to travel around Phuket with no tourists. Imagine. And obviously got to know a lot of people. And he is very similar to me in terms of his willingness to just reach out and meet people and develop friendships and connections. And so Andrea and I decided 2 years ago, well, yeah, we're looking for a holiday. We said, why don't we go to Phuket? Alex is there, and we'll probably have a very different experience because he's a local and he can show us around. So we did go, and we had this amazing holiday. And just one of the things that was quite unique, he knew places that I would have never discovered as a tourist. A restaurant that had just opened 2 weeks earlier. And one night we were at the market, the night market, and his phone rang and he answered it. And anyways, he turned to us and said, "Oh, my friend Bill's just asked if I want to go on the boat tomorrow." And I explained that you're with us. And he said, "You're welcome to come out on his boat. Would you like to go out on a boat tomorrow?" And I, you know me, Simon, I'm going to love boats, right? So I said, that sounds great. So he said, yeah, okay, we're in. Anyways, what I didn't realize was his friend Bill, was a millionaire, and this was a super yacht. So we went out onto his super yacht for the day, and my son's eyes bugged out of his head when he saw the size of the boat. And when we got on, and they had like a buffet, ready for us for lunch. And my son's like, oh my God, this guy's really wealthy, Dad. He's rich. It's like, but that was an experience that like I would never have had. And now my son's had this amazing experience of being on a super yacht. And it's all because I was playing tennis one day and I decided to strike up a conversation and, seek to have a deeper connection than just, say goodbye and thanks for the game kind of thing.
Yeah, so you're right. Like, when you're saying that, it reminds me of a number of my experiences when I was younger. And I was in the UK, and I was involved in International Student Society, and had that as experiences of visiting friends all through Europe. And you said through those connections, you get an experience that's far richer than perhaps what you'd do if you buy the Kentucky tour type thing. So, okay. We're going to park that because we need to get into this scenario. Now, so this scenario, for those obviously listening, it's around this concept of deep connection. It's set, was it 2045? Is that right?
20 years ahead.
20 years ahead. And there was any significance for the time frame in terms of when you were writing this?
There was, because my son's currently 15, so he'll be 35. And it was I was around 35 when I went to Burning Man and had quite a profound experience. And so that's what kind of made me think about what would it be like for my son 20 years from now if he was to go to Burning Man?
This is kind of the core of the scenario. Your son Blake going to Burning Man for the first time at the age of 35 and mirroring your own journey in a way, which I think is so beautiful. And so, interestingly, coincidental, Burning Man is on this week. It is happening at this very moment in the
At this
US.
moment.
In this moment, I did see that there's been a bit of carnage, but we might park that conversation because I'm even interested. There's a touch of that in this scenario, but there's some other stuff around hardship and things that are worth probably pulling on threads at the end of this. So what I'm going to do for now, Mike, is I'm going to throw to you, and you are going to read your scenario from start to finish. Okay, the camera is all yours.
The bus doors sighed open, and a ribbon of heat unspooled across the black desert. Blake stepped down into it, the fine, talc-like dust rising to greet his boots. The horizon shimmered sun-silvered dunes, wind-bent shade spires, and a procession of kite-sailed mutant vehicles nodded like patient animals. The air smelled different, sweet, with something like possibility. Blake rested his backpack against his leg and glanced at the cloth patch stitched to the strap. A small flame with the date embroidered beneath it, June 22nd, 1986. His dad had sewn it on, a relic of a story he'd told 100 times about two friends, a handmade effigy, and the first moment when strangers chose to be we instead of me. Remember, his dad said, pressing the patch flat. Magic happens on the playa. Back then, it sounded like a line. Today, it felt real. The gate greeter's eyes crinkled above a scarf. First time on the playa, she shouted over a gust. First bird, Blake said with a nod. Perfect. Then you know the drill. She pointed to a low bell hung from a tripod, solar-etched, tide-worn. Ring to arrive. Kneel to meet the ground. Offer what you want to feel this week. He knelt. The playa dust kissed his skin, cool and soft. And for a second, he was 8 again, chalking spirals on a concrete, while his dad told him about radical inclusion and random acts of kindness, like it was a bedtime story. When he stood, he rang the bell with the back of his hand. The sound went up and widened, and the wind shifted as if to carry it to anyone who needed finding. The evolving city looked like old photos he'd seen, tents and domes, and art that refused to sit still, but it sounded different. Less speaker thunder, more voices. A dozen small circles gathered under shade wings. People sat cross-legged, holding smooth stones as they spoke. At the edge of the camp, a wooden arch read, Signal Garden. Underneath, a rack of sealed pouches waited for phones. Still present, not purposely silent, now purposely silent. An elder with a feather hat nudged him. Device asleep there, he said. They're safe. You're safe without them for a while. Blake slid his phone into a pouch and lingered as the attendant heat-sealed it shut. He could feel a reflex tug in his palm, a ghost text, the itch to check on everything and nothing. He let it pass. A teenager passed him by, green hair, bright grin, and offered a high five. First hour is the hardest. Then you get your mind back. Past the garden, he found Kinship Kitchen. A crescent of grills and solar ovens ringed with water barrels. Cook for someone you don't know, the sign said. He chopped capsicum with a stranger named Roe, who'd arrived from a flooded port city, and they swapped recipes and stories, the kind with splinters and salt. Between sizzles, Roe tapped the locket at her throat. AI booked my evacuation bus. It also fired my whole department. Mixed blessings, she smiled. I come here to remember the parts of me that technology can't parse. On the hour, a bell chimed across the camp. Listening fields opened, chalk circles on packed dust, each circle with a theme: grief, wonder, beginnings, endings. He stepped into one and took 3 smooth stones, traded a stone for a turn to speak, left one to show you were still listening. No moderation by clever software, no metrics, just the slow alchemy of attention. Blake hovered, then walked into beginnings and took his stone. What brings you here? A man asked, sunlight bright on his forearms. My dad came. A lot, Blake said. He said this place taught him about human connection and to reimagine what society could feel like. He rolled a stone in his palm. I've had years of conversations through lenses, scripts, even dates that felt like a performance review. I want to know what connection feels like without the training wheels. The circle breathed. Someone spoke about a child born in a blackout. Someone about leaving a nation that had suddenly decided they were a suspect. Blake offered a stone and said, I fix things for a living, systems, broken processes. But I haven't let anyone fix me in a while. There were nods, and not the polite kind. The circle held. It held the space. In the afternoon, the wind came up like a mood change, sharp, insistent. Shade spirals flexed. The repair yurt opened its flaps, mending cloths, patching tents, and writing written in chalk beneath meditating arguments. Inside, 2 friends sat back to back, a facilitator, tattooed forearms, patient eyes coaching them through breathing before words. Outside, a group practiced consent signals, palms up and open, learning to greet with body language before language itself. Somewhere, a parade of wind kites pulled a whale the size of a tram across the playa. Kids ran behind it, dragging tails of ribbons like comet dust. Blake passed a witness hut. No AI counselors here. Just a bench and a hand-lettered invitation. Be seen. Be quiet. Stay until the impulse to perform dissolves. He sat. The world slowed to the click of bicycle hubs, the hush of filtering cloth, the occasional whoop when someone's home-built instrument found a perfect note. The need to caption his own life embed. When he opened his eyes, a woman was sitting across from him, hands folded, gaze kind and steady. What did you come to feel? She asked. Like I'm part of a we, he said, surprised by his own swiftness. Not a feed. Then let's find your people, she said, standing. They walked toward the inner ring. where the man rose, latticed and impossible, the late sun snagged in his ribs. Around the base, plywood plaques told fragments of the lineage. Larry and Jerry on the beach, a small crowd finding itself at the edge of the Pacific. The years in the desert, years of smoke and storms. The turn when camps agreed to go carbon negative, and not as a stunt, but as a promise. A kid traced a finger over 1986 and asked his mom, "Was it always this big?" The mother giggled. It was always this human. Night came on like ink spilled slow. The city lit itself, glow wires, lanterns, a galaxy of headlamps, and the whale floated back, now lit from within, a moving constellation. A drumline synced with the wind. Blake felt a hand slip into his. Ro, smiling, "Come see something." She led him to the quiet burn, a circle within the circle. No music, no narration, just a ring of people standing shoulder to shoulder around a small sculpture of intertwined hands. One by one, they stepped forward and whispered into the wind what they were releasing. A grudge, a mask, a habit. When the flame caught, the crowd didn't cheer. They exhaled. You could hear it, a single tender tide. Blake watched the carvings blackened, curl and rise to join the night. He felt the week unfurl before him. Meals made and shared, circles entered and completed, art stumbled into and then stewarded, the old muscles of presence waking up again. He thought of his dad, 4 burns stitched into his stories, sending him out with a patched backpack and a blessing. Let yourself be changed. On the walk back to camp, the wind went soft. A stranger offered him a cup of tea and a question. How will you carry this home? Blake didn't answer right away. He lingered in the silence, the warmth in his hand, grounding him in the moment. Then he replied, by remembering that what we share here isn't casual. When humans truly connect, something deeper stirs, something magical that only lives between us. The stranger raised her cup. To the magic of connection. To the magic of connection, Blake echoed, and for a bright, brief moment, the desert felt like a neighborhood where everybody knew his name.
Oh my God. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the time it's taken for you to write this. Like it's so deep as well. Like I'm genuinely concerned about how we're going to do justice to this in the time that we have available. Like there is just layers and layers of meaning and ideas that have been stitched together in this. Before we kind of get into some of those kind of questions and stuff I have, do you want to share, like I know you mentioned just in our kind of pre-chat that in reading it back, you almost kind of had a tear in your eye yourself. Like, and obviously this is very personal in terms of the subject being Blake, your son, and this experience and the experience that you had. Tell me about the process of bringing this together as a scenario, and what were the signals and the ideas that you felt were so important to capture in this?
That's, so much goes through my mind, and a lot of emotion also comes up when I start thinking about this, because I've I really wanted to say I wasn't really, it caught me by surprise how emotional I got when I started writing this. And as soon as I started feeling these emotions, I could feel my throat kind of choked up a couple times. I said, "Wow, like there's really something here." I'm definitely on to something, because when you get that strong emotional response, there's a lot there. And for me, um, like I discovered Burning Man through a friend, and this friend I met when I was on my incredible adventures sailing around the Caribbean, and I ended up um, going back to, so I sailed from the Bahamas to Cuba, and then I was meant to sail from Cuba to um, uh, some other islands, and we ended up demasting that boat in an accident and had to return to Cuba. And there's a whole bunch of stories. You've heard some of them, but one of the consequences of this was I ended up going back and spending a couple more weeks in Cuba that I never planned. And I ended up going to a remote area of Cuba, an area called Flores, which is not really touristy. And I had this random meeting at a waterfall, and I met this um, very eccentric couple that had just arrived a few days earlier from the UK, and they were celebrating their honeymoon. They just they just got married, and we had this just random chance meeting at the bottom of a waterfall where um, we were the only ones crazy enough to strip off and jump in and go skinny dipping in this ice cold water. And, it was a moment in time, and we, sort of put our clothes back on and said goodbye. And then a couple days later, I bumped into them, and I bumped into them on the beach. And Charlie, who I was traveling with, we discovered this amazing, really authentic Cuban bar which had live music and no tourists. And we were like, yes, like this is it, right? It's the real thing. And so I said to them, would you like to come? And they were like, yeah, that sounds fantastic. And so they joined us that night, and we partied with all these Cubans, and we like got incredibly drunk on Cuban rum. And at the end of that night, we exchanged emails, and this is long before Facebook, right? And so I'm so grateful for that, because fast forward 6 months later, I've now sailed across the Atlantic and sailed from Miami all the way to the UK. And my mom's British, so I live and work there, and I decided to stay for a while, and I ended up there for 2 years. And after being there for a few weeks, I sent an email to Tony and Sarah to say, "Hey, I'm in the UK," and they said, "Oh, why don't you come down to London, spend the weekend, come stay with us?" And so I did. And what ended up happening was they became very close friends. And as a result, they introduced me to a whole network of friends that were amazing, extraordinary people. And so my entire experience in the UK was shaped by a moment at a waterfall, the base of a waterfall in Cuba. And this is the point I guess I wanted to make is that if we actually embrace connectivity and this, you just never know where that leads to. So fast forward, I'm, living in the UK. I've been living there for a year. I'm catching up with Tony and Sarah. I'm having an amazing time going to parties, meeting their friends. And they started talking about Burning Man, and they said, they were going, and I'd never even heard of it. And so it was it was them that really, invited me to go and share the experience with them. And that was the start of my experience. And I've had now 4 trips to Burning Man, and each one has been profound. And I think what a lot of people think about when they think of Burning Man, a lot of the media portray it as this, bohemian party. It's just a music festival in the desert, and it's so much more than that. And what I was going to say is that I've discovered that every time I go, I get a deeper, more profound experience. And I have had extraordinary experiences there. So it kind of made me, so it was kind of fortuitous that we started this conversation, and I started thinking about deep connections and w- what what the future might look like. And the whole birth of Burning Man was uh, a couple guys that started thinking about how could we reimagine what the future of humanity and civilization might look like. And it started with this tiny little gathering on the beaches of California in 1986. And today, like as we speak, there is close to 80,000 people from all over the world gathering to create to form a temporary community that is based on a gift society. There's nothing, you can't sell anything, you can't buy anything. Everything is gifted that entire week, and it is a profound experience.
And now a word from our future sponsors.
Getting from Sydney to Burning Man isn't easy. It's 13,000 kilometers, 3 flights, a bus to Reno, and a hitchhike in the back of someone's glitter-covered van. But at Destinations, we don't sell tickets to get you there. Instead, we help curate your journey through gifts. Your airfare? Swapped for a hand-knitted sock puppet. Your hostel in LA? Paid forward with a family pack of Tim Tams. That sketchy lift to Black Rock City? Traded for a backpack full of glow sticks and a mixtape called Desert Ready Tunes. At Destinations, the more you give, the further you go. We call it frequent favor points because anyone can buy a holiday, but only the truly committed can gift their way to the other side of the world. Destinations, powered by generosity.
There's in reading this, like I think even in that first paragraph, it was incredibly clear that you had been and that you were sharing a very personal experience. That line around, the horizon shimmered, sun-silvered dunes, wind-bent shade spires, and a procession of kite-sailed mutant vehicles nodding like patient animals. It was like, oh my God, it was like I've seen pictures, and yet that was the very first time I felt like I was there. You've done an amazing job of taking people into that space, which is very admirable. I want to talk, though, a little bit about this as a future scenario. So this is not your experience. This is Blake's. This is set somewhere probably 40 odd years after your experience. Is that right? I'm kind of guessing you were there somewhere maybe in the mid 2000s or so that you were there.
Yeah. Yep.
And part of this is obviously, dotted through your scenario is references to stuff going on in the outside world. That, the shaping of the flooded port cities and AI being used and these other types of, like, they're almost like sitting external to this space, which I think is beautifully done, by the way. But I'm curious as to how you imagine, and I don't know because I've never been, like, what parts of this story about Burning Man are the same as your experience? And which are the ones are you projecting the future of Burning Man, projecting as the future of Burning Man? Like what, tell me where the future is in this story.
So I think the thing that I've experienced going to Burning Man is the way that it strips away all the norms of society, the kind of car we drive, the neighborhood that we live in, where we went to school, all of these things are stripped away so that we are all one, having an experience in the desert. And one of the things that I think has made Burning Man so successful, and why people seek it out, is partially because the climate is so harsh and extreme. You know, as we speak, they've had high winds that have torn people's tents, and they have things called theme parks, theme camps, and people build these amazing, elaborate structures to invite other people in, and they have bars that serve you, martinis all week long, and you don't have to pay for them, right? Like, everything is gifted. So there's an amount of intentionality and generosity that go into creating an experience for people with no expectation of anything in return. It's a gift society, and that's one of the things that is amazing. And there's people walking around just gifting things, and so you have these random acts of kindness happening constantly for a week, all the time. And it is really quite profound, and it brings the best out in humanity, in my opinion. Like, and you and I were sitting here today, blessed to live in Australia, blessed to have been born into the circumstances we are, and yet we turn on the TV and we see horrific images of Palestinians starving to death. We see what's happening in the Ukraine, and it really frustrates me, because I think on one hand we're still savages, that we can do this to one another, but also be compliant in not stopping it. And I think at the moment, there's a massive uprising in terms of people just going, enough's enough. Like, this is enough. So I think Burning Man is a microcosm of what the world could be. And I think the intent that what I've experienced is that a lot of people go to Burning Man and it changes them. Like, it's a profound, deeply profound experience if they open themselves up to that, and they start to realize that we can, we can live differently, that there is a different way, and that there's this shared humanity that we all have. And I like the amount of people that I just struck up conversations with, random strangers, and had incredible conversations. Just, it's magnificent. And people just giving you hugs in the middle of the desert, that it just gives me hope that we might find our way, so that we can live differently than we are. And I guess, I hope that for my son. Like, that's what when I was writing this, I think why I got so emotional is because I sometimes get really saddened, and I feel a sense of despair, and also almost helplessness when I watch what's happening in the world today. So that's kind of, I don't know, I rambled a bit, but I hope
that's
that
okay. There's a bunch of stuff that came up in that ramble that I'd love to kind of unpack a little bit more. It's almost hard to know where to start, but I think the first one I heard, which I think is really powerful, is the value of discomfort in terms of creating connection. And in previous episodes, we've kind of, talked about this one of my frustrations is this idea that we almost seek to live life at 22 degrees Celsius. This idea that we want a level of comfort, and we move from our air-conditioned houses to our air-conditioned cars to our air-conditioned offices. And on one hand, in doing so, we don't get to feel as alive because we don't get to deal with the variation. But what I'm hearing from you, which I think is also really powerful, is that hardship is actually a place where we find connection. And almost extreme hardship is a place where we find deeper connection. And I'm not saying that that's the only place we can find it, but there is something that is forged in shared hardship. And, one of the things I lament as well as we get older and more affluent, we almost feel bad about calling on our friends to help us with things. It's like, I need to move house. I'll get a removalist. I need to do the gardening. I've got a gardener. But what we're actually doing is taking away the opportunity for people to have that shared experience with us. So I find a bit of that in this. That was one thing that I picked up. Another thing that you mentioned that I think is you talk about this as a microcosm. It's a place of almost like we can suspend disbelief. Like we can suspend the norms of society and live out a version that's different. And part of me goes, that's amazing. But also part of me goes, if you think about it, right? The guy hanging out the free martinis, he's probably had to save up months of his pay packet, to be able to go there and hand out the free martinis. And in some ways, this is not sustainable. The model itself is not sustainable without people going and doing the stuff outside the model to feed it, right? So I kind of find a tension there personally. Like on one hand, I would like to believe that we could take this microcosm and expand it. And yet the microcosm isn't expandable in the format that it's experienced at Burning Man. You kind of pick up on that tension too?
Yeah, I mean, I see it slightly differently. I think, yes, some people might not be able to hand out free martinis, for an entire week. But I think it's Burning Man is a gift society, and what I've seen is people will gift what they can, and I think there's an opportunity for us to also pay it forward. Like, did you ever see that movie, Pay It Forward? Yeah, that was
that Will Smith? Was that one? That Will Smith?
I don't think it was Will Smith. I forget.
It feels
the actors.
like something that Will Smith should be in. No.
Yeah. But for me, when I saw that movie, I thought, wow, like if we all just paid it forward for someone else, because the idea that if you do something for me, I pay it forward to two people, and the only caveat is that they have to pay it forward to two people. So you're always going out and with this expansion. And I think, I think coming back to the question, which is, what does Burning Man have to do with the future of deep connection? I think there's something profound when we go and we are stripped of our modern day, comforts like air conditioned car, air conditioned office, etc., as you said, and we are now living through some hardship, and we are also we're back connected with Earth. Like we're not living on a 30th floor building. We're on the playa, which is what they call the ground at Burning Man, and it's a harsh place because nothing grows there, like nothing, not one blade of grass, not anything, and yet everything flourishes for that 1 week, even in the extreme rain or winds that they're experiencing this week. People are flourishing. And I think it's humbling for us as humans to go and have those experiences. And I think it's important because I think technology and certainly the rise of AI is creating more distance between us, not bringing us closer together is my biggest concern. And I think, you talked earlier about my experience with men's workshops. I feel it's the same thing that, I've been involved for, it's probably about 18 years ago that I did my first men's workshop. It was a 3.5-day residential, full immersion, experiential workshop. And it literally changed me. And it was, more profound than I was expecting. And what I think the link between that weekend and going to Burning Man is you go through hardship, you go through an experience together that unites you. And so like that, I still remember that weekend. There were 30 odd men who were all strangers from various walks of life, some wealthy, some very modest, but, all of us came together and we were like brothers by the end of the weekend. And I was amazed that you could feel that close and share such deep, intimate secrets with complete strangers in 3.5 days. And I think for me, Burning Man's very similar to that.
Yeah, and that's an interesting connection that I wouldn't have made myself personally. Like if I was to look at those two things, a men's workshop and Burning Man, they feel like they're so different, but in the way that you have described this experience, that's like I don't know which bit's which in this. It feels like there's elements of this scenario which like they could have been just lifted out of a men's workshop, and yet they feel perfectly at place in this scenario about Burning Man 20 years from now. Before we jump into that, because I do want to explore that a bit more, but the other thing that came up for me, and I don't know if you've ever come across the kind of spiral dynamics kind of theory. So Claire Graves, Don Beck, and spiral dynamics basically suggests that as human society, we go through evolutions and levels of development. We spiral upwards. And I kind of studied this as part of my postgrad work, and I don't remember all of it in detail. But these levels of development and sophistication in society happen. And what it kind of appears to us at certain times, though, is we get a glimpse of the next level before we get to live it. So we get a glimpse of it. We get this kind of aha moment about how this next level of development answers many of the problems and the questions that we have about the current level of development that we find ourselves in. Not all of societies are on the same level of development. So you have more authoritarian societies around the world, or democratic societies, and we kind of also have this oscillation between individualistic and collectivist views. But at this highest of levels, there's a collectivist view, and I kind of feel like in some ways, through your experiences of Burning Man, you have had this glimpse, and you've got, oh, this is what it could be like. Then you kind of leave that experience and you go back to the kind of the center of society that you live in on a daily basis. And it's not like that. It's highly individualistic. And there's little kind of maybe signs around the place that it could be more collectivist and it could be more generative, right? But it doesn't exist. And almost there's a frustration that then we sit with because we know of the potential, but we don't get to experience it on a daily basis. So that came up for me with this, and it came up for me even in that pre-conversation that we had around your frustration around deep connection. Because you in some ways have both the gift and the burden of knowing what an alternative could look like. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah. Yeah. And it creates a real challenge, right? This tension, because Well, I think that's why so many burners, people who go to Burning Man, come back year after year. Like, I think, I don't know what the statistics are, but I think most people who go to Burning Man don't just go once. Like, so I've got a friend in Brisbane. He listened to me talk about my experiences at Burning Man for a number of years, and he one year said, I'm going. Like, I'm going to go check this out." He's now been 8 times. Like, and he started going, later than I did, right? So, and for him, he really, like, there was something that really spoke to him.
No, there's been an attempt to do Burning Man or a version of Burning Man or recreate that within Australia. I don't know if you know about that. I think it was even run by some people out of the hub, or that may be where I heard about it. Part of me feels that if you wanted to take the principles and the premises of deep connection that happen at places like that, and you want them to flourish in general society, we need to find other places for this type of deep connection to happen. And so one place might be a men's workshop, but even that, as I said, I feel like there are barriers to who can attend. Like A, be a man, but B, also it has to be a man that is looking for that thing, as opposed to, I think, a lot of people in general, male or female or whatever, like they wouldn't even know that this is the thing that is missing for them. How do you take what you know to be true about the value and the need? I almost describe it as a need for deep connection within society, because it does address, or feels like it is, part of the answer to many of the ills that we face. What would be the things that we could do to bring that into more mainstream conversation?
Talk on a podcast about it. I'm hoping that someone listening today goes, there's something in this. So I want to say thank you for giving me the forum to spread this. I think, I'll give you another sort of insight, and then I'll try to answer the question. Like, I was at the gym this week, and I was doing I was on the treadmill, and I just winding down after I'd done a spin class, and I just was looking out, at some of at the people in the gym, and it's a large gym. There's probably easily 80 people there, and I just noticed, I just was observing how people are just keep to themselves. And there was this one young girl, like, she must have been probably 20, maybe 19. And she was on a machine with headphones on, and she was looking at her phone the entire time and, you know, tapping away. And I imagine she was talking on some kind of socials with her friends. And I just thought, I had this moment where I thought, geez, like, this is just the norm now. The other day, I picked up my son. I was taking him to his, I was explaining he's just got his first job. I was driving him to work, and he pulls out his phone, and he's constantly messaging his friends on it. So on one hand, they're hyper connected, but he's missing the moment to connect with me and have a moment of conversation. Same with this girl in the gym. She could probably make a new friend in the gym just by striking up a conversation with someone or making eye contact. And I think, somehow we have to create opportunities for people to put their phones down. And, like, one of the things that I recently experienced, back in April, I went to Bali for Easter, and Andrea and I, we were in Uluwatu, and we went to this one place, that when you arrive, they take your phones. Your phones are banned. And we were thrilled. And guess what happened, Simon? People started making eye contact. And lo and behold, I struck up a conversation with this amazing guy from him and his wife from Switzerland. And we're now friends, and we're now communicating and talking. And we went out for a beautiful meal together that night. Would that have happened if we were allowed to bring our phones in?
I think there's something really powerful in this. And it's something that, so we all want a level of connection in our life. And we can have that connection with our family, like say our nuclear family, and we hang out with them, and sometimes we fight with them, but we have that connection and that trust with them. And then, as I said, through the mediated connections that we can have through technology, we can just choose a handful of people and convince ourselves that we can connect with them, and then there's a likeness between us, and almost not be forced to find a likeness with others. And I think that that's interesting in terms of like the fragility it creates, because by not exploring and finding the fact that as soon as you scratch the surface, we actually have a lot of similarity with lots of other people. In fact, I do deeply believe that there are some underlying philosophical beliefs that are common to probably 90+% of people around the world. Like 90+% of people largely believe deep down the same core things. How they express that in the world could be quite different. And there can be different interpretations of what those philosophical beliefs are. But at the core, there's some stuff around be good to your neighbor and stuff that was just like, yeah, that's just true. And yet we're taking away the opportunity to find that connection with others. I think that's a really, really interesting insight. And part of me then goes, okay, though, the use of the device, though, is so personal. It's like you get to pick up your device, or you get to go to the place in Bali that takes your phones, but that was a personal choice in and of itself, right? And if people aren't choosing that thing, how do we get this to spread?
Geez, you ask tough questions, Simon.
Okay, so let's frame it another way. Okay, here's a note, like a little thought experiment, because we talk about the spiral dynamics and how do you give, like, it's almost like how do you give people a glimpse? Do you mean like we don't actually have to change them? I think sometimes we feel we need to change people. Obviously, notwithstanding the fact that for someone to change their mind, they must do it. You can't do it for them. But if that idea of that, on one hand, you had this glimpse, and it was not even just a glimpse, it was an immersion into, say, Burning Man or into a 3-day men's workshop, right? And like you left there and go like, wow, this is real. What would be the glimpse that people could have? The paid forward concept, even like talk me to about how we could do this.
Yeah.
We got to change the world.
Well, okay, because I think the pay it forward concept works, right? So let's use the men's workshop, for example, right? So how did I discover it? Well, I was going through a divorce at the time, and my wife came back from the doctors to say, oh, she just saw the GP and he mentioned she should do this women's workshop, and she kind of was dismissive of it. And I had to go see our common GP a couple of weeks later, and I raised it. I said, oh, she mentioned that you'd suggested a workshop. What was that about? And so he said, well, I went on this men's workshop recently, and he said, I'm not really usually into those kind of things. To be honest, the only reason I went was because a mate of mine kept nagging me. And finally I thought, well, just go and do it to shut him up. And he said, it changed my life. And I was like, wow, tell me more. And, what he shared made me think, oh, this is something that I'm interested in, I'm curious about, right? So I'm naturally curious, probably more so than the average person, but I went, and what was extraordinary was, at the end of the men's workshop, so I've been there for 3.5 days, had this experience. They have this final, this ritual where we finish the event, and we form a circle, and we're a group of men, like imagine like 50 men standing around in a room holding hands with their eyes closed, singing together, all singing, right? And what they do is they invite the family and the friends that had sponsored the men to come up on the workshop. They're invited to come to acknowledge the men at that moment. And so what happened was they said, gave us instructions, close your eyes. In a moment where we're going to play some music, we want you to sing along with us. Keep your eyes closed for the entire time. Don't open your eyes. So, because of the weekend, that's something that everybody honored. And then the music stopped, and they said, okay, you can open your eyes. And here, standing in front of me, was my GP. He'd come up, like driven from, and I was living in Brisbane at the time. He'd driven, over an hour to come and be there for me and stand in front of me when I finished this experience. And I just burst into tears because it was so moving, the fact that he was willing to do that for me. Like, he was doing something that he didn't have to do. Like, he just told me about the fact that he told me about it and suggested I go was enough, but he'd actually taken time out of his weekend away from his wife and kids to come up there, be there to acknowledge the inner work that I'd done. I was like blown away. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I think in that moment, I decided to start to pay it forward. And so I have sent other men to do this, like that, people who are open to it, who've said, oh, I'm kind of curious. So, I'm going through some stuff, I think, and I said, well, would you be open to it? I'd be happy to introduce you. And I've probably had maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 men that have gone since then, like over the last, 18 years. I've probably sponsored 18 men to go do that work. And I've been there for almost every one of them when they open their eyes. And each time it's like it's like two souls looking at each other with this experience that I can't even put into words. Like, just an acknowledgement of his soul, acknowledging my soul in that moment. It was profound. So I think, what could we do? We could create, tell people about it, to, create these opportunities, look for those opportunities to help people. It doesn't always have to be a men's workshop. It could be inviting them to a Carl Cox concert, like to me, it's about what I think community is community is about participation. It is about involving everyone, right? Like, so you feel part of the community because you're being involved and you're participating. And that's what Burning Man, there's 10 principles at Burning Man. One of them is participation. There's no spectators at Burning Man. Everyone is a participant. It's a very different way of thinking about community. So I think, that's my thought on that.
I feel like I feel like we haven't really done justice to your scenario. Like, there's so much in there, and I don't feel like we've even scratched the surface of it yet. Which, on one hand, is a reflection of how many amazing little tangents there are to explore, and the second is probably a reflection of how awesome it is as well. And I know, unfortunately, we can't talk forever on this, though I do sense it will come up in our conversations again. But before we kind of move towards the end of this, I almost want to ask you, what is the thing that we haven't talked about that we should have? Like in writing this, like is there a line in there or a concept in there that you go, this matters, or this part of it, that deserves to be discussed? I don't want to leave here and feel like we missed the gold.
Hmm. Well, there's a lot of gold, right? There's a lot of gold. For me, what I hope from today's podcast, those listeners that have listened this far, if they've been moved, right, in some way, curious to just be open to taking more risks. I think that's particularly what one of the themes that maybe we didn't talk about is, you know, I took a risk to strike up a conversation with Tony and Sarah in Cuba, and it changed the course of my life. I I took a risk to strike up a conversation with Alex at the tennis club, and that's changed and enriched my life. And I took a risk to go to Burning Man, and that created an experience for me. I think part of the concern I have is with the digital age that we live in is we become more and more insular, and we become more reluctant to take a risk to reach out um to a someone that we don't know. And it is a risk to be rejected, right? Every time we reach out to try to connect with someone, some people can choose to reject us. And I think what I would invite all of your listeners to do is to lean into the risk and do it anyway, right? Because I think what I've experienced, the richness of my life has really come from taking those risks to strike up a conversation with someone that I wouldn't have otherwise connected with, and my experience at Burning Man and my experience at these men's workshops is often I look at on the surface, the person seems like so different to me, that from a very different walk of life, or we don't have anything in common. And there's always something that we have in common. And it's been, I think, the common thread in my experience is that that's our common humanity, that often comes from some form of challenge, right? So whether it's on the men's workshop and we're starting to look deep at and doing some inner work, which is challenging, or we're at Burning Man this week, enduring 70-80 kilometer-hour winds and floods. Those are the things that create opportunity for us to deepen our connection. And I think if we are going to evolve as humans, evolve human consciousness, and I think if we're going to survive as a species, we have to evolve human consciousness. And I believe that is linked to connection. And the more we see people as friends rather than foe, the more we make connections with strangers, the more we realize we're all together, we're all one, and the more chance we have of saving the human race. Because right now we're at a pivotal point, and I think, to me, that was the message that I hope people take from our conversation today.
There's a line in there that I think was the message you sent Blake off with of let yourself be changed. It feels like that. It's just let yourself. And the thing that's really come up for me in this is I've always kind of, even perhaps my reluctance in terms of things like, men's workshops or men's circles has been almost the, to go is in some ways to acknowledge that you're broken. And it just in this conversation, I've kind of wondering about a reframe of that. And it comes back to an idea that a friend of mine and a previous podcast guest, Dr. Adrian Medhurst, said to me. So Adrian's an organizational psychologist, but there's a line that he said to me once long ago that's always stuck with me. And he said that we don't really have a health system. We have a not sick system. So we don't go to the doctors to get healthy. We go there because we're sick and we want to be made not sick. Like none of the conversations that we have around health are generally about, but how do I get better? Like, how could I even be better? And I wonder, if in that sense of reframing, when we do these things, maybe it's not about fixing something broken, though I do believe probably we all have broken bits. But the other reframing of it is like, but don't worry about whether you're broken or not broken. It's just, what's the opportunity to find something new and something better? And then maybe that could be the catalyst to make that little shift. And I love the idea that that shift could be as small as be open to eye contact. Even if nothing else comes from it, be open to eye contact, be open to the conversation. And then the next level beyond that is, if you're open to the conversation, start it. I think they're beautiful little micro actions that people could take. Okay. This honestly, when I've done these podcasts, I was like, about an hour or so is a really nice amount of time. And we're substantially over that. But that's because even now I still feel we haven't done justice to the conversation that could be had, which is again, testament to the scenario that you've written. The question I do want to ask you though, before we close this out though, is about your own experience of doing this. And as I said, we've known each other for a while, but this, podcast recording kind of its genesis was 3 weeks ago or so when I said, hey, do you want to come on? What would you talk about? And since then, your kind of antennas, like your mental antennas have been tuned into these kind of concepts of deep connection, even though I know it's something that you spend a lot of time thinking about. What have you uncovered, or what have you learned over the last few weeks as you've kind of gone through this process?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just, felt fear right away. Like I was like, oh shit, like what have I agreed to? And then I was, starting to think, oh my God, well, what do I have to say? Like, why would people want to listen to me? And I think, it was a great parallel to what I was just talking about, which is, you have to take a risk, right? So I took a risk to come on this podcast, and have this conversation. I'm so glad I did, like it's been enriching. What did I learn from this experience? I think what it did was it created an opportunity for me to think about something that I don't often give myself time to think about. Right. So I'm often thinking about my business and how I continue to look after my clients and grow the business and everything else that fills my life. But, this was a great luxury that I think I'd like to probably do more of. Right. So giving myself permission to sort of sit, dwell and really go deeper on a topic that's important to me, something that's important to me. I think that's what I took from this experience. And I really want to thank you for that. Yeah.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Like, this has been a delightful conversation, and one that it does in a way reflect some of the conversations that we've had in the past. But I think that even some of the conversations we've had about these different kind of parallel experiences and stuff have not gone as deep as this has. So it's been beautiful to have this conversation with you. And quite legitimately, your scenario is one of the most like beautifully written scenarios that I've seen. It's just so nuanced in the way you bring together both this optimistic perspective and parallel that with the challenges that society potentially faces is extraordinary. So thank you so much for your participation in this and being on my podcast, and thank you for your friendship. And I look forward to the next time we get to sit around and talk like this, whether it be in a sauna or by a fire, with some Cuban rum. There's so many opportunities.
Or at Burning Man.
Or a Burning Man. Yes, that did come up. And you have certainly re-whetted my appetite.
Yeah, no. Hey,
All right.
thank you, and thank you to your listeners. Yeah, it's great.
Awesome. Well, that is all for this episode of The Future with Friends. We'll be back again in another couple of weeks with some more deep conversation. But for now, catch you later. Well, that is all for this week's episode of The Future with Friends. If you've enjoyed the episode and you want to support the show, the number one thing you can do is share it with your friends. In fact, it would give me no greater joy than to think in a small way the conversations I'm having with my friends could be a positive influence on the conversations that you are having with yours. Other ways to support the show include going onto the podcasting platform of your choice and giving us a rating. Obviously, I would like it to be 5 stars, but you should ultimately do whatever feels right for you. And if you don't feel quite ready for that yet, if we're not at that point in our relationship, the other thing you can do is send me small gifts in the mail. I always enjoy receiving them. Well, that is all for this week. We will be back in another couple of weeks with the next episode. And so until then, my friends, I look forward to seeing you again.